Welcome, everyone. We'll give others a few more minutes to join, but while we wait, I can answer a couple of questions that were submitted during our registration. So, both relating to forms, the first question was, is there an extra cost when we used Grist forms? No extra cost. You can use this with the free team plan. You can use it with the paid team plan. There's no extra cost for using forms. And then the next question was, can we link the Grist form to our website? And you can. You can link, like if you just want to include the link on your website, you can do that. You'll have to publish the form. There's a publish button here, and that'll create a link, which we'll cover in our webinar today. But you can also embed it on your website. So as of now, you would copy this published link that'll be generated and then embed it in an iframe. So we do have a page in our Help Center about embedding Grist. And there's an example right here. You would just embed the link to the form where you see this URL, just replace it with yours. We are going to be adding an easy way to copy and embed code. So keep an eye out for that. That feature is coming soon. And then I can share a link to this embedding page so y'all have it. So we got 2 questions submitted. Can I have an upload link to a Dropbox account folder? Bruce, that's a good question for our community forum. If you can share kind of how you plan to use it and like the setup idea you have, post that to the community and we could probably offer a suggestion. We do have a custom widget that links to Dropbox. So there might be something that someone can come up with. Let me send you, I'll share the link to the forum as a pop-up. And then another question, are Grist forms optimized for mobile use? That is a great question. I have not actually tested it on mobile personally, so I can't answer that. But let me test this here. One of these pages has a form. There we go. We'll do a quick test just using Chrome's built-in. Let me see. Okay, so this is how it would look on an iPhone. So it looks like it looks pretty good. So yes, it looks like it is optimized for mobile use. That's a great question. Oh, next question was, does Grist forms allow conditional logic? Can you post that one in the community as well? And then elaborate on what you're trying to do. And we can get you an answer. And if it's not a thing, we can just submit it as a feature request to our team. Option to incorporate a captcha for added security. Not at this time. That's actually a really great idea. Let me make a note of that real quick, and I can submit that to our team for feedback. Awesome, great questions, guys. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our February webinar. So last month, we discovered the magic of our Markdown widget. We learned how to generate proposals and contracts, as seen in our aptly named proposals and contracts example located in our Help Center. So you can find a recording of that webinar, along with all of our previous webinars, on our YouTube. So you'll find a recording of this webinar there in the near future, next week sometime. But because you are registered for the webinar, you'll actually receive an email almost immediately following completion of the webinar with a link to the recording. So our webinar today will continue focusing on views, but in particular, our highly anticipated form widget, which we just got to see a little bit of. We will be learning how to create forms and collect data from external sources using our Net Promoter Score results template as our example. So we'll also cover a summary table and chart creation at the end, just so we can visualize the data that's received via our survey responses. So I'll share a link to the template that I'm referencing, just in case you want to modify it for your own use or just follow along. We did get a question submitted. Can Grist forms automate tasks like email sending or record updating upon submission, or should we use Zapier N8N? You would want to use an integrator service like Zapier or N8N. And then when something's submitted, it would create a new record, and that could trigger an event in one of those services and then send an email. And Nick just responded about the conditional logic. Both conditional logic and captchas are on the dev team's radar. So coming soon. I have no idea what soon means though. Just keep an eye out for it. Of course, we'll always publish updates in our monthly newsletter. So to start, we'll just go through this template. We'll be recreating a large chunk of it, and then you can just have an idea of how it works. So here we've got our survey form, which we saw a little bit of already. This is how we can collect information from our customers if it's published. Right now it is not published. That's why we see a green publish button, and we'll go through those steps in a short bit. So then once the information is submitted via a form, it would go into our all responses table. That's what the form is built off of. So when a customer submits the survey form, it would create a new record here and capture their responses. And then this data from this table is actually what populates our two dashboards. The first dashboard being responses by month. It shows us a breakdown of surveys by month, so I can see how many people responded. And then I can also see their average score. Over here, I can see the distribution of scores. And then we have the overall dashboard. And this shows a breakdown of surveys by month again. But here on the right, we can see the distribution of all survey responses. And then on the bottom, we can see our scores month over month, the average NPS score, and then also the response count. So you can get an idea of how many responses you're getting over time and what that average score is. So we'll build out a large chunk of this in a new document. So to start, we'll create our data table to contain the data that our customers will submit via a form. So we'll want to collect customer data like name, email, survey score, etc. And so you would just set up those columns in your table. So we want an explanation for why they're giving us a score so we can always fix issues. And then I'm gonna add one more column. That's just a toggle type. If you guys haven't seen our add new menu, it's been updated. So now you can select a type, you can add a formula column, and there's some other shortcuts here. We do have some information in the Help Center that kind of elaborates on each of these. So definitely check it out. But I'm going to add a toggle column, just asking if we can contact the customer. Now, you'll be able to set up different names for fields in your form versus how they appear on your internal table. So feel free to keep some shorthand and we can use different language on the form. Just going to change this to a switch. So these are the questions that we want to ask the customer, but also think through if there is other data you would want to collect for each record that might not necessarily go on your form view. For example, we can use a trigger formula to collect information about when a survey response was submitted. So I can just add a new column. We're going to add a date time so we can capture that information on when the response was submitted. Now for this, we can just use a trigger formula, which is a formula that's just triggered by an action. Specifically, we'll leave apply to new records checked. That's the default. So when a record is created, it'll capture the current time and date using our function now. And so if I create a new record entering my name, it captures the current time and date for the default settings of the document, which for me is US Central Time. Now it's also useful here, since I'm asking if a customer wants to be contacted, just keeping track if we did contact the customer. So I'm going to add another toggle here and just to note if they've been contacted. Now I'm going to add the existing data from our template so we can use it later for reporting, which will just make our charts look better, having all that extra data. Oops. Copy it from here. And then we'll just rename our table to all responses. And then we have a couple questions. Does Grist Forms offer multi-language support for international users? Oh, that's a good question. So when you are setting up your form, whatever language your questions are in are going to be how it's presented. But if there's other language, I would think that most of the language that you can configure is going to stay in the language that you enter it in. That's a great question. For some of the other things, I'll try and point things out as we go through on where it'll be your language versus maybe our default. But that's also a great question for the community because maybe some of the default stuff might be able to be translated. And then can Grist Forms capture and store images via the camera? It cannot. As of now, you cannot attach things via the form, though that is an improvement on our list. So coming in the future. Okay, so now we have our underlying data table ready to accept data. Let's build out our form view. And so I'm going to build this on the same page. It's a widget, so you can add it as a new page. You can add it to the same page. I'm going to just add it to the same page so it's all in the same place. And under select widget, just select form. And then you select the data table that the form is going to feed to and also take questions from. And for us, it's our only data table, all responses. We'll just add it to the page. Now, as we build it out, I want it full screen. We do have this expand button here on the right. So if you want to ever make a widget larger, just use that. So by default, our form view will populate with all of the fields from our underlying data table. So here we see submitted and name, email, etc. We see all of the fields there. Now you may not want all of that information there. For example, we just set up submitted as a trigger formula column, so it'll automatically calculate the current time and date as soon as a customer submits their form. So they don't need to enter anything for this particular field. We can just remove it from the form. We also don't need this contacted field because this is for internal use, just letting us know if we contacted a particular customer over a specific response or not. So we'll remove that as well. Then by default, we also add a few different building blocks to the form. So we give you a form title, form description, and then this header and description. These can be drag and dropped to different areas in your form. You can also just remove them if you don't need them. Just click delete, hover, and delete. Now, all of the building blocks in the form allow markdown formatting. So if you saw our webinar last month, we focused heavily on markdown. I'll share a link to the markdown basic syntax guide. It will link to this page, and it's just a great resource for getting started with markdown. It tells you exactly how to do different things in markdown. This menu here on the right hand side will let you jump to specific sections, and if you don't see something here that you want to use, across the top there is an extended syntax, which is just more advanced things you can do with markdown. And again, just has the handy list so you can jump right to a section. And just note that you can also use HTML tags within our markdown editors, which we're going to see here in a second. So 2 questions that I am going to actually answer in just a second. So the first question was, are there customizable design options available for Grist forms to match our brand's aesthetic? That's where the HTML comes in. You can change so much with HTML. So for example, here I'm going to add an image using HTML. So if you wanted to add your company's logo, I'm just copying and pasting, but you use an image tag. This is just the link to my image, and you can customize the width and the height all within an HTML tag. So if you are unfamiliar with HTML, Google what you're trying to do with HTML, and there's a lot of helpful resources out there. So now I've got an image or, company logo, whatever you want to add there. And then I'm just going to add my company name. And you can custom, like if you wanted to do custom colors, that would be done via HTML. Markdown doesn't allow all of that type of formatting, but between HTML and Markdown, you can do quite a bit. And so the description one, same thing. You can still use HTML Markdown formatting here. I'm just going to use Markdown. The 2 asterisks will bold the font. There we go. And so I will answer your second question here in just a second. So if you want to add more elements to your form view here, you just scroll to the bottom, click this plus sign, and you can add a bunch of different things. So you can add a new question. If you're adding a new question, you would select the column type and then set it up in your form view. It would also add that new column to your underlying data table. You can also add unmapped fields. So these are fields that exist on your underlying data table that have been hidden from your form view. So we hid submitted because that's our trigger formula column that will just assign the date and time when the record is created. And then we also hid contacted. So those will, anything hidden will always appear here. So if you accidentally hide something, you can add it back. And then we have our building blocks. So we've already seen a couple of these. I'm just going to add them each to our form just so we can see them. Header, pretty straightforward. It's a header. It's already set up with Markdown as a heading. And you can just edit the text. You can edit it with Markdown further, but I'll go ahead and delete that. This one's a paragraph one. It also has some Markdown in it so that you can get started if you want bolded font versus italicized, or just normal font that has nothing going on. You can see the 3 differences. And then the next question that was posted in the chat was, can we put 2 fields on the same row, like the layout of the cards? You can, and that's with this column feature. So you just add it under building blocks as columns. You can also add more columns if you want. So if you want like 3 or 4, I just want 2. And then you would just click and drag. If the fields are already on there, you would click and drag. Or you can click on the column and then pick what you want from the list. Oh, there's a remove column option too. I did not know that till just now. So if you add an extra column, you don't have to delete the whole thing. You just go to remove column. So let's say you want okay to contact, and then you just want a little comment off to the side. We'll do. And so you can just add text in one or add another field. A lot of fun stuff that you can do with the columns. And Bruce makes a good point. Be careful with columns when the form will be used on a form. 2 columns, probably okay. 3 or 4, think about how small that's going to be. And so when you are previewing, just always double check how it's going to look on a mobile phone if that's how people are going to be submitting responses. Okay, so let me move some of these around. Perfect. Okay. So earlier, when we were setting up our underlying table, I did mention that you could set up different names for fields in your form versus how the columns are labeled in your table. And we would do this in the creator panel. So the creator panel is off on the right-hand side. If I click on a field, we would see the field title, the column name, and that's just how it's named in the underlying data table. If you add a field title, it'll override, and so on the form, that's what we'll show. We'll rename a different one. And then down here we have field rules, which allows you to mark a field as required. So I'm not going to make any changes to name, but NPS score, I'm actually going to change the field title on this one. I'm just, instead of a title, we're just going to include the instructions. So people can provide a rating between 1 and 10. And I'm going to mark this as required. And so that adds a little green asterisk. I'm also going to require the reason for this score so people can elaborate on why they gave the score they did. And so these field options are just under the field tab. You also have some other options under the form tab. So under form, and then this middle sub tab is submission. And that allows you to do quite a few more things with your form. And so to answer the question before about languages, obviously whatever information you add for your field names, like reason for score, that would be the language that they see it in. So anyone accessing this form would see English, reason for score. They'd also see English for the header here, but if you changed it to another language on your own form, they would see whatever language that you're asking the questions in. Now, you can also change like the submit button. So if you are in another country and don't want to use English submit, you would use whatever that would be in your own language. And I can just change it here to send feedback, just to change it to something different. And you'll see that it updates right away. And then when someone submits their form, on the next page, there would be a success text. And so you can customize that. By default, it's thank you, your response has been recorded. But we can change it to whatever we want. And then once they submit on that next page, you can add another button to submit another response. Now for this one, you aren't able to change the language, so it says submit another response. I know that with the translation, Grist translation, I'm not sure if this is included. So I would recommend asking on the community if it's included or not. Plus, it's something you can test if you change your language. So we can test it in a minute. And then finally, this redirection option. When you click this, it would redirect after a user submits their form to whatever URL you provide here. So if you want, once they submit their survey response, you want them redirected to a very specific page, just include that URL here. And let me just test the language real quick. Now, because this is new, it still shows English. So there's two different things. It could be that it's not included in our translation yet. Or if it is included in the translation, someone hasn't gone in to actually translate it yet. So great question for the community on the translation for some of these specific items, like the submit new response button. Just looking through the questions here. Can we add some default values to the fields? I haven't actually tested that yet. Let's do a test real quick. So I don't know why I just scrolled all the way down. I didn't need to do that. So let's, you wouldn't be able to because the record isn't created yet. So default values are added when the record is created. So like if you were creating the record here, I could add a default email address, but that won't fill in until the record is created. I hope that makes sense. So let me just do an example here. So when a new record is created, this default value will fill in for email. So if I create, then the email fills in. But with the form view, all of the values are created at the same time. And so there's no way to do default values. How does Grist Forms handle offline submissions? I'm not sure what you mean by that. Because it's through a URL, I would think it would be all online. So I don't think I completely understand that question. And then, oh, that's a good idea submitted in the chat was a user currently has their submit button going to an empty Dropbox folder for uploading any necessary files. That's really clever. Smart setup. Okay. Let's see. So now that we have our form set up, I'm going to remove submitting another response, but we can go ahead and publish the form. Now it will give you this warning. You can choose to hide it for the future, but it just gives you a general idea of what the permissions are. So users can submit entries, meaning records to your table, and can see preset values. Like if you have a choice column or a reference column, they would be able to see those values in the dropdown. So it just gives you that information. Again, these are things you can look at in your preview when you go to test it. We'll go ahead and publish. And so once your form is published, it does let you know that every change is live. And then it does have this copy link button, so you can share that with users. Now I'm going to share this in just a second, but I am going to remove the email and name field so no one has to submit any personal information. But I'm going to share this link in the chat, and I'll share it as a form. 1 second. And there we go. Now it's a button too. So go ahead and fill out our survey that we just created. And we'll be able to see the responses that are submitted added to our form. So see, we got 2 already. And then I'm actually going to collapse this here. To collapse a widget, you can click this 3-dot icon and then collapse it, and it collapses it into your top tray. Ooh, we got quite a few responses here. Excellent. Just enjoying life. Perfect. Excellent. Okay. So before we move on to more of the reporting side, I am going to share a link to our Help Center article on forms. So it does cover all of the different features that we just discussed. There we go. So it's a good resource. If you lose the link later, just go to our Help Center, type in form, and it'll be one of the first items that appears in the search. Okay, so now that we have submissions, we would love to easily view details about our data using charts and summary tables. So for this particular example, it is helpful to break things out by month and year. We have this date column, but if we try and group by date, it'll just group all the same dates together and times, and it won't work. So what we want to do is to create a couple formula columns, and then we'll use those to group by. To create our summary tables. Okay, so we'll do month, month. We'll add another one for year. And so the formulas for these are quite easy. Click the equals key to start entering the formula. And then you'll first want to specify the column that contains your date. So we can just click submitted. And then the month and year formulas are nice and easy. Just click the dot and then month, and that will return the month value. And then we'll do the same thing for year. Just click the column that has the date value, dot year. Now, as you're making summary tables with these, you'll quickly realize that these aren't great for labels. They're great for summarizing our data, but when you go to make a chart, you want a nice label on it. So we're just going to add one more formula column. That's going to just be our label. You can add a description that it's our label. And now for this one, again, equals key to enter the formula. Here, we're going to use strftime, which is string format method that lets us take a date value and then put it in almost any format we want using some cheat codes. So first, again, select your column containing your date, and then we use dot, and then here we call the method strftime. And then now we need to tell it what the format is that we want to use. And so we do have this little cheat sheet, and I'll share a link to this. It's a handy thing to just have bookmarked. And it has all your little cheat codes for strftime. So the format I'm wanting to do is I want the full month. And so the code for that is %, capital B. And then a 4-digit year, which is %Y. So because it's a string, we use quotes, and then we enter the code values. So it was capital B, and that was for the month, spelled out. And then for the 4-digit year, it was capital Y. And so now we just have a nice label. So this isn't necessary to do, it just makes your graphs look nicer, and we'll see that here in a second. And now we can actually use our month and year and our label technically to summarize our data. So we'll create a dashboard to see some of our overall details. I'm just going to add a new page. We'll add a summary table to start. To create a summary table, you click the summation icon next to the data table name that you want to summarize data for. And we'll want to summarize by month and year. This would mean that September 2022 would have its own row, October 2023 would have its own row, etc. I'm just going to include our month year column because that's our label. It won't actually change the way things are separated, but it will add a nice label column. And so now we've got our summary table. It does show the count, which is just the number of responses. You can change the column headers on these to something that makes more sense to you. Now, summary tables do summarize any numeric column. So it's giving us a sum of our survey scores. Not terribly useful. We would much rather see the average. So you can double click and you can change these formulas however you need to. So we can do the average. Obviously, we don't need decimals, so we can go ahead and round that. And I'm just going to center it so it looks nice. And don't forget, if you do change the formula, sometimes it's useful to update the header. So we're just going to change it to average net promoter score. A little repetitive. Okay. And then finally, we can sort. So if you want the most recent data at the top, this is where having this month and year column separated can be helpful. Just sort Z to A. You can also add a second sort, Z to A, and save. Now we can just hide these two. They work in the background. And then we just have our nice label column. We can see our number of responses. We can see the average score. And then next, we can add a chart to create a nice visual representation of this same data table. It'll just allow us to easily see how the score and number of responses has changed over time. So you add a new widget to the page, but now we want to select chart. Again, we're summarizing, doing the same thing as before. It's just now it's a chart. And I'm going to click and drag this to move it. Okay, so now chart tab and this widget sub tab is where we can change details about our chart. So I'm going to leave it as a bar chart. But across the bottom here, I want the month year. Again, it just makes for a nice label. And then we can see our series. Here it's using the NPS score. We want the average. And you can also move these around. So whichever one is at the top is going to be the number that appears on the left. If you just wanted one, you could just delete the other one. But we want to see both. We want to see how the number of responses has changed over time. We'll just change the label. Count and responses are the same. We had just changed that up here. There we go. And so now you can see how it's changed over time. You can see how the average score changed. This month it's nice and high. And you can see the number of responses, and you can see like what months you get the most responses. It allows you to visualize that data a lot easier. And so we're going to add one more chart that just shows the spread of scores for the selected months. So like in March, I see I have 11 responses. The average was 8, but how were those 11 actually spread out? So once more, add a widget to the page, selecting chart again, summarizing, same columns. But now we're actually going to select by our table on the left. drag this up here. And then again, you can change the information in our creator panel. So on the x-axis, I'm going to use the NPS score. And then all I need is the count. And so now I can see how many 10s I got, how many 8s I got, etc. And it gives a better breakdown of what the month really looked like. So I will share the article that walks through charts as well. So if you need a review of it, there is a link to our Help Center article. And I do see the note about including all of the links, and I will be sure to do that for you this month. There's a lot this month. I think I had close to 8. But that is our webinar. I know we covered a lot. Feel free to put any of your questions in our chat, and I'll be able to answer them for you. Ooh, good question. Does Grist Forms support input validation, such as for emails and value limits? Value limits, not yet. But I know that it was submitted as an idea by one of us to our developers. So hopefully on the list for the future. For the email validation, I don't know if it is on there, but I can submit it as an idea. To our team. Oh. We can always edit your NPS score from D. Yep. Yeah. So because I had set this to numeric, there's no check when y'all submitted the form. So he submitted D, but it's still submitted. I also, like, obviously in the text said, oh, 1 for low and 10 for high, but you could still submit 120 because we don't actually have a min and max value yet on the numeric column. So, but I'll submit these ideas to our dev team for improvements. And of course, as you're using forms and you have product improvement ideas, feel free to post them in our community. Do I have the link? Oh, community.getgrist.com. Here we go. When you create a new topic, you can actually just select feedback and share it with us in the community. And because it's in the community, then other people can hop on and say, hey, yeah, I like this too, or I like this idea, but here's a slight suggestion to change it because here's my use case. And so feel free to post a bunch there. Awesome. Any other questions? Question is, can we inject Python code that will be executed via a formula through the form? So if you are doing formulas, they would have to be on in the field here. So like, obviously this isn't Python, but let's say this was Python. Well, actually this one is, and it works in the background. So like when someone submits an entry, this formula runs. But there wouldn't be a way to like type in a formula in the form Like if someone put a formula here, it wouldn't run. It would just be a string text. I hope that answers your question. If you have a use case specific that you're trying to do, though, of course, post in our community forum, and our devs can see it and could see if maybe there's a good product improvement around it, or could at least help direct you to a solution. Can you use an animated GIF in the header? Ooh, that's a great question. Let me, I would, I don't know the answer to that one. I would have to test it. Post it into the community. Oh, you're saying you can use an animated GIF in the header. Okay, very cool. So if you want to use GIFs, you can use HTML to put it in your header. But feel free to showcase your forms. If assuming there's no sensitive data, you can showcase it on our community as well. So thanks everyone. Have a great month, and we will see you next month.